Okay,
Good
I'm
afternoon,
ready to go.
everybody.
Please begin.
This is Jonathan Petry, architect here in Kansas City District. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Today we're going to talk about the National Defense Appropriations Act of fiscal year 2012. And as soon as I get my mouse on the right screen here, I'll briefly introduce the UFC during this, but it'll be a future webinar before we get really into the technical details of the new sustainability UFC. So today we're going to discuss the attention to the military's use of LEED, the impacts the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2012 has had on sustainable military certification, LEED certification, and us as designers and builders of Army projects. I'll briefly cover the background and purpose of the new UFC, and then kind of a real broad, high-level overview of UFC 1-200-02. The text of HR 1540 is available on the web for anybody who wants it, but the basic purpose, as it's stated there, is to authorize appropriations for fiscal year 2012 for military activities of the Department of Defense, for military construction, and for defense activities of the Department of Energy, to prescribe military personnel strengths for such fiscal year and for other purposes. This act may be cited as the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2012, but I'll refer to it throughout this presentation as NDAA FY12, NDAA 12, or probably simply just NDAA. Again, you'll probably see this a lot of different places. HR 1540 is the official title. In it, Section 2830 required a report on energy efficiency standards and prohibition on the use of funds for leadership in energy and environmental design gold or platinum certification. It passed the U.S. House in December of 2011. The Senate, and also a day later in 2011, was signed December 31st in 2011 by President Barack Obama. It authorizes $662 billion in funding, among other things, for the defense of the United States and its interests abroad. In signing the statement, President Obama described the act as addressing national security programs, Department of Defense healthcare costs, counterterrorism within the United States and abroad, and military modernization. It also imposed new economic sanctions against Iran, commissions appraisals of military capabilities in such countries as Iran, China, and Russia, and refocuses the strategic goals of NATO towards energy security. The act also increases pay and healthcare costs for military service members and gives governors the ability to request the help of military reservists in the event of a hurricane, earthquake, flood, terrorist attack, or other disaster. So it's much broader than what we're focused on, but Section 2830 is our main purpose. And many of you probably have already heard about this language. And so I was just going to attempt to provide you an update of the ramifications of this language with the two requirements there: report submission by the Secretary of Defense and prohibition on the use of funds for LEED Gold or Platinum certification. Headquarters USACE is acutely aware of the importance of issuing implementing guidance with regards to this section of NDAA, and they've confirmed they're working to provide guidance on LEED certification within the near future. We are considering the impact to Air Force and other customers, and this language has much broader impact than just the Army. And you'll probably hear more in the future of implementing guidance in the issuing of policy documents from headquarters. The specific language coming up here, report submission. The report required, or the bill required the Secretary of Defense commission a report. That report has been completed. The link is up there on the web, or it's up there here on the presentation. The report is titled Energy Efficiency Standards and Green Building Certification Systems Used by the Department of Defense for Military Construction and Major Renovations. The Department of Defense was really looking for a third party to come in here and say, should we be using these sustainable rating tools, or are we wasting valuable taxpayers' dollars on this? The National Research Council became that third party and addressed the requirements of Section 2830, and they affirmed the use of the LEED rating tool for DoD facilities. So as you can see, this has been getting a lot of attention in the media. We should probably crave this attention, but be prepared to shine under the spotlight. Back in 12, when we first released, or when the NDA was first signed in on December 31st, so first week of January, immediately everybody jumped on and said that this document is, or this law is limiting the military pursuit of LEED certifications. And a few months later, they said the Army was abandoning LEED certification. That article came out while I was teaching a class with Lindsay Pruitt from headquarters out in South Carolina. And Lindsay, a few folks from Searle, and some other folks from headquarters were immediately talking to the press, putting out our story, essentially saying that isn't the case. The Assistant Secretary of the Army feels very strongly about LEED, feels very strongly about green rating tools, about sustainable design, about energy concerns, and we are not abandoning it. So a year later, the report came out at the beginning of this year, and now the report says, again, you can see there, military should use LEED despite political pressure. The CoStar Group came out and said LEED doesn't cost more, and even with the defense budget spending freeze, we should be doing things like LEED because it is cutting the life cycle cost for our facilities, and in the long run, it will help with future defense budget spending freezes. There are still, at the end of February, Seattle Daily Journal comments there was starting to question, as well as some other articles that were kind of linking to this one, that it may still be under threat, and this article is focused more on other agencies other than the Department of Defense. So what did that law really say? Prohibition on the use of funds for LEED, Gold, or Platinum certification. No funds are authorized to be appropriated by this Act or otherwise made available for the Department of Defense for fiscal year 2012 may be obligated or expended for achieving any LEED, Gold, or Platinum certification. Part 2 there allows the Secretary of Defense personally to submit a waiver and notification to Congress at least 30 days before the obligation of funds to achieve LEED, Gold, or Silver. Let's just assume that option is not a realistic option, and any project that wants to attempt LEED, Gold, or Platinum probably isn't going to get the Secretary of Defense to sign a waiver request for them. That notification, though, would consist of a cost-benefit analysis of the decision to obligate funds towards achieving LEED, Gold, or Platinum certification and demonstrate payback for the energy improvements or sustainable design features. Since we're probably not going to take advantage of that waiver in Part 2 and further explain in Part 3, what we're looking to is the exception. So we always have an exception with these laws, but how do we really want to implement this? It says LEED, Gold, or Platinum certifications shall be permitted and not require a waiver and notification under this subsection if achieving such certification imposes no additional cost to the Department of Defense. This essentially says, rather than taking or requesting additional funds from Congress exceeding your project authority just because it's green and green is good, and throwing more money at it may impose market transformation and make it cheaper in the future. This was Congress saying, stop that practice. We've given you a set amount. Follow your program amount. Deliver what you can for those dollars. If you happen to get LEED, Gold, or Platinum, that's okay as long as you aren't asking us for more money. So we did receive some implementing guidance, ECB 2012-14. I have a question here in my room. What's the question?
If you, quote unquote, happen to get LEED, Gold, or or platinum, wouldn't you have to be able to defend those things that put you over that with the life cycle costs?
So the question was, if you do happen to get LEED Gold or Platinum, would you have to be prepared to defend those decisions that led to LEED Gold or Platinum? And the simple answer is yes, you are going to have to defend that, and we'll get into, on the next few slides, the how that you, or the how behind defending that. So this ECB says projects where LEED certification is being requested by the government, which under our current rules is any Army project FY13 and beyond, and the Air Force project FY12 and beyond. Project managers need to ensure that there is no contractual language requiring LEED certification above the LEED Silver level, and that no LEED credits are planned solely to achieve a certification higher than Silver. A statement to this effect shall be included in the project documentation. The government shall not appeal any disputed credit where there is a potential for raising the certification level above Silver to Gold or Platinum. Projects being designed where design is completed at LEED Silver may proceed through construction and be submitted to the U.S. Green Building Council or GBCI for certification. Project scopes at levels anticipated above LEED Silver may continue with current scope through design and construction phases, provided that Gold or Platinum features are obtained within available funding and reduces the total cost of ownership over the life cycle of the facility, as stated in the references. Projects not in compliance with the reference B in ECB 2012-14 are to be brought back into compliance. Projects underway that are anticipated to be certified at levels Gold or Platinum may proceed with submitting to GBCI on schedule, but must document any and all incremental costs incurred by the Army above the cost for LEED Silver certification. As it states there too, the Army's objective is to meet mission requirements and comply with federal mandates. Right now, those mission requirements say LEED Silver, and many of the federal mandates, though, may push us above LEED Silver. Things under ASHRAE 189.1, things in some of the ECBs. Gold may just be something that happens, but you need to be prepared to document what those things are, why pretty much every point that you've attempted is mandated by some other reason or was a no-cost design feature to earn that, and be prepared to document that in your design analysis and in any responses to data calls that you may receive. So again, just to restate there, within available funding and reduces the total cost of ownership over the life cycle of the facility. So this requires, again, accurate life cycle cost analyses that show that your first costs are covered within the available funding, and that over the life of it, we're paying less for energy, or paying less for water, or paying less for waste or for maintenance on the facility. Projects where a LEED certification is being requested by the construction contractor, you may still have some of these at this point that were FY 10, 11, 12 projects that have not completed construction yet, and you weren't required to certify that, but the construction contractor chooses to certify that based on making themselves more marketable. We will permit them to certify the project, but we will not compensate the contractor for any expense expended with the express intent to obtain LEED certification above the Silver level. It is recognized that competitive best value proposal details and requirements cited elsewhere in our requirements documents and supporting documents may provide for features which allow for certification higher than Silver to be obtained. Whether to achieve a future marketing advantage or other purposes, a contractor may obtain LEED Gold or Platinum certification, provided that achieving such certification imposes no additional cost to the government. And the government's evaluation of any contractor proposals from here on out should not consider any offer statement of intent to achieve or otherwise provide a certification higher than Silver. Essentially, there's no betterment that says or it should be considered in evaluating source selections that LEED Gold is better than LEED Silver. With a larger audience, or with a live audience in person here, I'd probably run through these questions and give everybody a chance to answer, as we do in the prospect course. But today I'll just run through the answers for these questions here. So for a project with a program amount of $10 million, if you award the project for $10 million and you're attempting 62 points, yes, that is allowed. In order to support that, though, you need to demonstrate a reduction of the total cost of ownership over the life cycle of the facility, or evidence that all points were earned due to compliance with other mandates. At 62 points, the second part there, evidence that all points were earned due to compliance with other mandates, that's probably achievable. If a project's attempting 70, 75 points, I don't think there's that many points that are mandated, otherwise all our projects would have 70 points. Number 2, award amount $10.8 million, attempting 54 points. Yes, that's allowed. You're only attempting LEED Silver, and the cost overruns at that point are within established limits. You'd still be able to make an award for a project at 10.8 if the program amount is 10 million. Number 3, award amount 10 million, earned 59 points, and the contractor attempts 3 more at no added cost to the government. That is also allowed. Contractor may wish to achieve a further marketing advantage or other purposes. In order to support that, though, they would need to demonstrate a reduction of the total cost of ownership over the life cycle of the facility and evidence that no additional cost was incurred to the government over the cost of a LEED Silver certified facility. The fourth one, an award amount of 9.8, so under the PA, earned 59 points, and the contractor decides they want to attempt 1 more to push it to gold at a cost of $0.1 million to the government, which would make the total award amount $9.9 million. Although that's still under the programmed amount, that is not allowed because you are clearly incurring an additional cost to just specifically achieve LEED Gold. Cost growth, even within the PA, is a red flag, and that would not be allowed, and that is pretty much explicitly forbidden by the NDAA. Is there any questions at this point about the NDAA from the audience? Nobody's typed anything yet. Does anybody have anything that I can try to answer? Okay, I'll move on to UFC 1-200-02, released March 1st of this year. For those who aren't familiar with UFCs, the Unified Facilities Criteria System is prescribed by MIL Standard 3007 and provides planning, design, construction, sustainment, restoration, and modernization criteria, and applies to the military departments, the defense agencies, and the DoD field activities in accordance with a USD memorandum dated 29 May 2002. UFCs will be used for all Department of Defense projects and work for other customers where appropriate. All construction outside the United States is also governed by a status of forces agreement, host nation-funded construction agreements, and in some instances, bilateral infrastructure agreements. Therefore, acquisition teams must ensure compliance with the most stringent of either the UFC, the status of forces agreements, the host nation-funded construction agreements, or the bilateral infrastructure agreements. UFCs are living documents and will be periodically reviewed, updated, and made available to the users as part of the service's responsibility for providing technical criteria for military construction. Headquarters USACE, NAVFAC, and Air Force Civil Engineering Center are responsible for administration of the UFC system. Defense agencies should contact the preparing service for document interpretation and improvements. This UFC now supersedes UFC 4-030-01 Sustainable Development and UFC 3-400-01 Energy Conservation. Some basic background is Energy Policy Act of 2005 and Executive Orders 13423 and 13514 mandate federal agencies to lead by example by promoting sustainable federal infrastructure through environmentally sound, economically sound, and fiscally sound design, construction, and operating decisions. Consistent with UFC program requirements, this document integrates unique DoD requirements with federal mandates and industry standards for high performance and sustainable buildings. The purpose of the UFC was developed to bring uniformity across the DoD components and drive market transformation and performance of DoD facility inventory, require greater energy efficiency and water conservation measures that demonstrate a strong return of investment, balance the building performance with occupant comfort, health, safety, and productivity, and cover planning, designing, and acquiring new construction, existing facilities and infrastructure, lease space, and installations. This UFC provides minimum requirements and guidance to achieve high performance and sustainable facilities that comply with EPAC 2005, ESA 2007, the two executive orders I've already mentioned, and the guiding principles for federal leadership in high performance and sustainable buildings. That guiding principle HPSB document was released originally in 2006, it's been revised in 2008, and there's currently another working group. And it's kind of the who's who among federal agencies getting together to decide what's sustainable for the federal government. So DoD is represented, EPA is represented, Department of Energy is represented, GSA is represented, and they get together and they decide what is it that makes a high-performance sustainable building. The UFC here is essentially organized around those guiding principles. And also, you'll see it parallels a lot of things in ASHRAE 189.1, which is an industry standard created to consolidate and address sustainability and energy requirements. The UFC, again, is implementation guidance. ASHRAE 189.1 is criteria. This UFC does incorporate and provide guidance on sections of ASHRAE 189.1 that are determined to be life cycle cost effective. Where provisions of 189.1 meet the intent of the guiding principles, those provisions are referenced as a means of compliance or provided as an alternative requirement. When other standards are referenced to ASHRAE 189.1, use the publication date of the standard reference in the Appendix A of this UFC. This document, again, it was meant, we've got new policies, new mandates, seems coming out at least every month, sometimes every week, that generally hit the big principles of energy, water, waste, materials, building occupant comfort, etc. And a lot of times they're very unclear, especially the public laws and the executive orders. So this, again, document was to collect all that. I think you can safely assume that if you meet all the requirements in this UFC, you are meeting all of the federal mandates. That's the intent of this UFC, to help, again, consolidate all the requirements into one document where, as new policies and new mandates are developed, we can revise this UFC accordingly.
Well,
yes?
does that mean that all of the ECPs that predate this document have been incorporated?
The question was, do all the ECBs that predate this requirement, or this document, are they included in here? The answer is yes. All intent was to take all of those ECBs and roll it up in one place. There are some things that may seem superseded in here, but some of those ECBs that you may feel have been superseded have already expired. This next slide here, policy and mandates. This is an attempt to clarify the myriad of policy and mandates. When I started with the Corps back in 2002, we had just gotten our fourth document there. That was the Army Policy on Spirit. And I kind of took over as a sustainability proponent here in this district. And maybe that was a mistake, because all these policies were dumped on us starting right when that happened, and it pretty much won a quarter. And from this, you can see the pink ones are the two major laws that came out there: EPAC 2005, ESA 2007. You see the blue executive orders going back to the Clinton administration. You see Department of Defense guidance, which tries to clarify both those executive orders and the laws. And then you see Army guidance, which clarifies it specifically for Army customers. There's also NAVFAC and Air Force guidance that I'm not addressing here today. This summary of UFC 1-200-02, I think, is in the front end of that, but the basic gist of this is more fight, less fuel. We are definitely in an environment of constrained, diminishing resources, and the less that we spend operating, maintaining our facilities in the future, the more that we can spend on other Department of Defense missions. The basic goal of this is to reduce total ownership costs. The impacts that we're trying to do, again, back to the total ownership costs. We see the energy efficiency, water conservation, which has appeared in all of the mandates going back to early versions of EPAC back in '92. Enhanced facility and installation performance and sustainability. Again, we're looking beyond individual buildings. We're looking at installations as a whole now, and one whole section of UFC will essentially address that. And we're trying to set the example as sustainable resource and environmental stewards. The last one there is focuses on really the purpose of ESA, which is we need to have secure resources if we're going to continue to support our armed forces. Security and resiliency is a big portion of the sustainability movement within the Army. There are a few issues that between different services. The Army requires meeting of requirements of ASHRAE 90.1 2010, but the Navy and Air Force are still on version 27. That essentially changes the baselines. The Army's baselines are more stringent than what the Navy and Air Force are currently using. The question was, when did we go to 2010? I believe this question came up yesterday when I was presenting this also. It was with ECB 2012-13 is my guess. I may have to revise that statement later. But when it addressed which version of ASHRAE 189.1 we are using, that version references 2010. A second unification issue is that the Army will utilize Section 7.3.2 on-site renewable energy systems, whereas the Air Force will not require that if a building level solution is not life cycle cost effective. So 7.3.2 reads, building projects shall provide for future installation of on-site renewable energy systems with a minimum rating of 3.7 watts per square foot or 13 BTUs per hour per foot squared, multiplied by the total roof area. Building projects design shall show allocated space and pathways for installation of on-site renewable energy systems and associated infrastructure. An exception on that is building projects that have an annual daily average incident solar radiation available to a flat plate collector oriented due south at an angle from horizontal equal to the latitude of the collector location, less than 4 kilowatts per meter squared per day, accounting for existing buildings, permanent infrastructure that is not part of this building project, topography or trees, are not required to provide for future on-site renewable energy systems. So what this is essentially saying is that the Army needs to provide the square footage necessary, the pathways, the structural systems necessary to put on-site renewable energy attached to the building, whether it's life cycle cost effective or not at the moment. You provide space for it in the hope that in the future it will be cost effective to come in with additional funds and install solar arrays or wind turbines or some sort of ground transfer heat system, something renewable in the future. The Navy and Air Force has said, don't do that at this point. What we're really looking for is a programmatic type solution to this or an installation-wide solution to meeting that renewable energy. I just realized I didn't skip a slide.
Geothermal is defined as renewable?
In some The organization of this UFC is very straightforward. Chapter 1 just introduces it, pretty much on requirements for new construction and major renovations to existing buildings. Essentially, major renovation being defined as something that would exceed garrison commander's authority or a certain threshold of money and provides for significant sustainable opportunities. Minor renovation projects, typically those don't provide for a whole lot of sustainable opportunities. It might be paint and patch jobs, but there's still some guidance in Chapter 3. Chapter 4 is how we should go through and do assessments on existing buildings and determine whether or not they're high-performance sustainable buildings or something could be done in the future for them. So with that, I would think retro-commissioning, some sort of, again, facility assessments, facility walkthroughs for energy requirements. Chapter 5 talks about high-performing sustainable building compliance reporting, sustainable policies, again, kind of in line with the guiding principles for HPSB Memorandum of Understanding. And Chapter 6, again, focuses on sustainable installations, where there's a much greater opportunity to balance sustainability and provide a greater return on investment. The appendices, Appendix A is references, Appendix B, best practices, C, glossary of terms, and Appendix D is projects impacting a historic building or district. So a lot of times you'll have State Historic Preservation Office will tell you you need to have a certain type of roof. Appendix D is meant to help clarify what kind of sustainable things you can do and still be in line with requirements from a SHPO. A quick little guide to how it applies to projects. So for new construction, 1, 2, 5, and 6. A new addition, which is probably adding square footage and affecting existing building systems, is 1, 2, 5, and 6. The major renovation, again, I said it includes changes to a building that provides significant opportunities to improve energy and water efficiency, which may include but are not limited to HVAC, lighting, building envelope, and other building components that have a major impact on energy and water use. They may also include projects that provide an opportunity for compliance with other requirements in the UFC. Minor renovation, the dollar amounts there, that's in 2007 dollars, adjusted for inflation. You should be utilizing UFC 3-701-01, Table 4-2, military construction escalation rates. The 50% PRV there, that's replacement cost is exclusive of the cost to bring the building into compliance. Under leased buildings, that chapter has not been developed at this point yet, but in the next version of the UFC, which is currently underway to coincide with the release of LEED version 4, expect to see the chapter of leased buildings. So the concepts that we address, integrated principles, chapter or subpart 2, and again this follows in those main chapters. Sustainable locations and site development, energy efficiency, water conservation, quality of life, materials and waste. You'll see this parallels things that you see in LEED, things that you see in ASHRAE 189.1, things that you see in the high performing sustainable buildings checklists. Nothing new in this UFC, but because the requirements were so scattered across all these various documents, the idea was to pull this all into one. When we talk about integrated principles, we're talking about designer assessment, operation, and management principles. There'll be a future webinar that will cover these concepts in the UFC in a much greater detail. One of the issues that we always have with these UFCs is that they impact or affect more than just the Army. And so at this point here, we are awaiting. I'm missing a final slide that I have here, but on the final slide, essentially, we don't have a policy update from headquarters addressing some specific UFC requirements that the Army really doesn't like. I mean, there were choices made when the Army, Air Force, Navy, and others got together that the Army didn't 100% concur with. And I've pointed out two of those issues where we aren't exactly in line with what the Navy and Air Force are going to do, but our other exemptions weren't published in the UFC, and so a policy update is forthcoming from headquarters that will clarify some options that you may not know about in the UFC. Hopefully that policy update will route its way around between headquarters, USACE, and XM and be released to us this quarter. But my guess is probably by the end of the fiscal year we will have a little bit more clarifying guidance for any questions you might have when implementing this UFC. Is there any questions at this point? I'm essentially done with presenting the content, and we'll field any questions. And if I can't get you an answer, I will follow up with you this afternoon.
Jonathan, we had a couple of questions from the online audience. The first is, are you still required to provide space if you qualify for the solar incident exception?
As I understand it, you do not need to provide that additional space. That the exception, you're not actually asked to provide the renewables at this time if they're not life cycle cost effective. You're asked to provide space, and the exception says you don't have to even provide that space if you don't meet that square footage, because it's unlikely that the Earth's axis is going to change enough to make essentially PV arrays cost effective.
Okay, and the second question is regarding renewable energy requirements. Are AXIM and IMCOM doing anything to ensure adequate energy master planning for installations?
The question is yes, they're concerned about, or the answer is yes, they are concerned about it. I don't know what the definition of adequate is. There's definitely thought about that. There is some guidance in this UFC to address some renewables. Personally, I think they have a long way to go to do adequate installation planning to really increase the return on investment. Obviously, renewables are not very effective when you do it on a building-by-building basis, but at the installation level or at a regional level, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if we could take all of our money and put it in the southwestern United States into PV arrays down there, it would get us a lot more bang for the buck than if we're putting PV arrays in, say, up at Fort Wainwright or Fort Drum. And so I look to see AXIM and IMCOM really get aggressive on this and come up with a more holistic solution than a building-by-building basis, which is what ASHRAE 189.1 is really geared at, because most owners have one building they're responsible for, so they can only impact one building. With a huge portfolio of buildings that the Department of Defense has, the Department of State has, the GSA has, those folks should be focused on what we can do with our existing portfolio and where we should spend money across the United States and across our facilities, OCONUS, rather than saying every project team pick up a few points here or there, pick up a little bit of trickle of energy. We really need to take a more holistic enterprise approach to this.
Okay, thank you. Those were all the questions. Oh wait, I see. Yeah, we have another one. Are we requiring water meters in new construction?
I believe water meters are required per other documentation. there is, or per other policies, there is some conflicting guidance on whether it has to be metered, say, at the water treatment plant or if it's metered at the building. I don't have an answer at this time. I know that almost every utilities is required to be metered at this point.
And here's another question. Does this document address the ESA fossil fuel reduction requirements?
The intent is yes, that those targets, which are very ambitious, this clearly, we aren't there yet. The technology is not there yet. We don't have an answer for how we're going to get to those big targets in 2030 and 2050. But this is to get us on that path and to, the idea through renewables, through conservation principles, start to make significant improvements before 2020 so that we can be on a much more sustainable path for projects we're delivering by 2030, and so that at least our facilities can be fossil fuel free by later in the century.
Okay, do we have any other questions from either in the room there or online? Here's a question regarding the requirement in ASHRAE 189.1, section 6.3.1 of the UFC that a minimum of 60% of, I'm sorry, the question's getting cut off here. Yeah, I'm only seeing that part of the question come through. Here's another question. Are we adding water meters for outside water use?
At this point, there's an ECB that says you shouldn't be using outside potable water. It should be all non-potable at this point, and I'm not sure how much a benefit a water meter is for non-potable water used for irrigation outside. The point of the water meters is for potable use. But I mean, I believe there's pretty clear guidance in this UFC that captures previous ECBs that say no more potable water for irrigation. And David, as far as that other question, there'll be a future webinar that will cover much more technical aspects of this UFC. I was really just trying to give everybody kind of a heads up of how it's organized so that people can be digging in there and have lots of good questions for the future presenter. And heard a rumor it may be next week's webinar or it may be a week or two down the road, but pretty soon here we will have probably an hour-long UFC specific, more technical focused webinar.
Okay. I do have another question. This one's regarding the applicability to projects currently under design, especially with regards to the new 90.1 2010 base.
As I understand it, within the UFC, it addresses some of the fiscal years. Whenever new criteria comes out, it's usually our policy that if we're past the midpoint design, we evaluate, again, it's probably life cycle cost effectiveness of should we do this or should we not? Are we going to drag on the project schedule trying to implement this or not? But I believe if you go back and refer to your ECBs, the one that required the Army to use 2010 came out with probably within the last year. I think it was 2012, mid 2012 that one came out. So I would check the applicability of that ECB against whatever your project timeline was to see if you're using the correct baseline.
I assume that when you say 2010, you mean 2010 and 2011, or whatever it is that corresponds to the paired 90 and 189.1. There's actually it's got them in pairs.
Yes. The question here in our room was that when we refer to these release dates on ASHRAE 90 or ASHRAE 189.1, those come in pairs, and each, 189.1 2012 refers to 90.1 2010, and the previous version of 189.1, which was 2009, refers to 2007. So they always come in pairs, and as we adopt one, the expectation is that the other one is adopted at the same time.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, Jonathan. I'm not seeing any other questions here online. We'll just give it another minute and then we'll wrap things up.
Did the percentage savings change when we went to 2010 because they changed the MASI 30%?
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar. Just a reminder, we'll be back next Tuesday from 1500 to 1600 with another webinar series. You'll see an email go out with the topic for that webinar. Thank you again, Jonathan, for your presentation, and this concludes our webinar for today.